Let's take a look at this question. A client with aldosteronism is being treated with spironolactone. Which finding indicates to the nurse that the medication is effective? A. A decrease in body metabolism. B. A decrease in sodium excretion. C. A decrease in potassium excretion. D. A decrease in aldosterone production. When you are answering an RN or NCLEX style question, I always want you to remember this. If you see a disease that you don't recognize, don't panic. Start with what you do know and use that information to figure out what you don't know. For example, maybe you don't immediately recognize the word aldosteronism. That's okay. Look at the other important word in the question, spironolactone. Most nursing students are familiar with spironolactone. It is a classic potassium-sparing diuretic. So even if you are not completely sure what aldosteronism means, the medication gives you an important clue. If a diuretic is being used to treat this condition, you should start thinking about sodium and water retention. Now go back to the word aldosteronism. You may recognize aldosterone within that word. By putting these clues together, you can begin to figure out what this question is testing, even if you did not recognize the disease at first. This is an important test-taking strategy. Use what you know to figure out what you don't know. Now let's review what aldosterone does. A simple way to remember it is, aldosterone retains sodium and excretes potassium. Water follows sodium. In other words, aldosterone causes the body to retain sodium. Water follows the sodium while potassium excretion increases. If you are still not completely comfortable with the relationship between aldosterone, sodium, potassium, and water retention, I explain this in more detail in my full lecture. We review the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or RAAS, adrenal cortex hormones, and how these hormones affect fluid and electrolyte balance. Once you understand that mechanism, questions like this become much easier. Now let's look at the answer choices. Choice A, a decrease in body metabolism. Metabolism means the chemical processes the body uses to produce and use energy, including building up and breaking down substances. Body metabolism is not the primary function of aldosterone in this question, so we can eliminate choice A. Choice B, a decrease in sodium excretion. If sodium excretion decreases, more sodium stays in the body. Water follows sodium, so more water is retained as well. But spironolactone is a diuretic. We expect it to promote sodium and water excretion, so choice B goes in the opposite direction, and we can eliminate it. Now we are left with choices C and D, and this is where the question becomes interesting. Choice C, a decrease in potassium excretion. Spironolactone is a potassium-sparing diuretic, so decreased potassium excretion is consistent with its pharmacologic effect. Therefore, based strictly on the pharmacology of spironolactone, choice C is a very reasonable answer. However, the original question identifies choice D, a decrease in aldosterone production, as the correct answer. We can understand what the question writer was probably trying to test. The client has aldosteronism, and successful treatment should reduce the effects of excessive aldosterone. But the word production is not completely accurate here. Spironolactone does not primarily decrease the production of aldosterone. Instead, it blocks aldosterone receptors, which reduces the effects of aldosterone. So a more accurate wording would be a decrease in aldosterone effect or activity. This practice question has some ambiguity in its wording, but don't spend too much time worrying about the disagreement between C and D. On the actual NCLEX, questions are generally written more clearly, and your job is to select the best answer based on the information provided and the medication's mechanism of action. The real purpose of this question is to understand the concepts behind it. Remember, aldosterone retains sodium and excretes potassium. Water follows sodium. And spironolactone is a potassium-sparing diuretic and an aldosterone receptor antagonist. Most importantly, remember this test-taking strategy. If you don't recognize something in a question, don't give up on the entire question. Start with the medication, symptoms, or answer choices that you do recognize, and use those clues to work your way toward the answer. Use what you know to figure out what you don't know